We human beings have taken over the whole planet, but now we must learn to share it, or else we will lose it. We have to outgrow tribalism, patriarchy, all our old ways, and we have to move fast because we're running out of time. I've always enjoyed a good revolution, so kitchens are an interesting place to be these days. This is where the basic power balance between men and women is being renegotiated at last, and if we get it right, the whole human race will be the winner. Most males behave quite decently as individuals, but when human beings get together in large groups, we behave very badly. Wars, tyranny, the huge gulf between rich and poor, north and south, and all those things are directly connected with the imbalance of power between men and women. Male domination is right at the heart of what's wrong with mass civilization.
Whether you're one of the celebrities in town getting the red carpet treatment, or just one of the hundreds of thousands of everyday people who want to partake in this inaugural celebration, everybody, and I mean everybody's, going to get a great show. In the nation's capital, I'm Lynn Blades, reporting.
Today, America is inaugurating a new president, and all the old hopes for peace and justice and equality are having an outing. But compared to its stated ideals, the United States is a grave disappointment. America's militarized up to its eyeballs, and it spent much of its history fighting wars on other people's territory: Native Indians, Mexicans, Filipinos, Vietnamese. Whole classes of its own citizens have spent generations at the back of the bus, and even now not one of its 42 presidents has come from the female majority of the population.
Well, I will go talk to Congressman Brown and
Elizabeth Furs has just surprised herself by being elected to Congress from Oregon. She doesn't fit the mold, and not just because she's a woman. She's also been a full-time peace activist for years, and last year she earned less than the minimum wage.
House meets at 11. Goodbye, lovey. Have fun, you and Barbara Streisand. Mike, I get to. Guess what I get to do? Another reception. Oh, my dear.
I'm so happy you're here.
Susie, this is
a thrill.
This reception is for all the women who were elected to Congress in 1992. There were almost twice as many of them as ever before.
Thank you. We'll follow your record.
Nice to see you.
Elizabeth Furs glad hands the crowd like any traditional politician. But she's not.
Having a good time? Don't stand up, please. It is time for those of us who have been disempowered in many ways, who felt that we're on the outside of the mainstream, to understand that, in fact, we can be incredibly powerful. Okay, I need my Senator, I have looked forward to this moment.
Yes, I have too.
I think this is a very male institution here. You know, when the 103rd Congress came in, and we're of color, we're women, it's a marvelous group of people. But once we got into the whole of the Congress, I suddenly realized how few of us there really were. Less than 10% is female. You look at those portraits in the rotunda, and somebody from outer space would say, this is a country made up of white men. And there's no women or people of color in those statues. It's manifest destiny writ large. We just wipe out parts of our history.
The founders of the American Republic were trying to escape from the evils of the past. They thought all they had to do was create a democracy. They didn't realize that the pattern of violence and oppression was part of civilization itself. Now we do, and we even have a name for it: the patriarchal order. king or emperor gives the orders. Those who enforce them have lots of power and privileges. People at the bottom have no rights at all. The poor, slaves, almost all women. And outsiders can just be killed if they get in the way. In fact, American warplanes were bombing Iraq on Inauguration Day.
What I think about now as we play this terrible game of cat and mouse is there are thousands of children dying in Baghdad from the last time we were bombing. What are we doing? When do we begin to say that an Iraqi child's life is the same as the life of a white American? Until we do that, we'll go on having wars.
Americans have been trying to break out of the old pattern for over 2 centuries, and there has been progress. There's no king now, and no slaves, and women have the vote. But hierarchy and violence still rule the world. Men still rule the world. This has been the pattern of our history for so long that many people think it's just human nature, and there's no point in asking a pig to fly. But before we abandon hope, we should be sure whether the patriarchal order is natural or not. And the key evidence for that is not here. It's deeply buried in a different time and place. Human beings have always lived in groups, but up until about 10,000 years ago, in the hunting and gathering times, the groups could behave in a wide range of ways. There were no more than 10 million human beings in the whole world then, but the groups were very small, and how they treated each other depended on circumstances. Rock paintings from Neolithic times suggest that many bands were warlike, with the warrior males running everything. But others did not glorify fighting, and in those bands, men and women were more or less equal. Around 10,000 years ago, the options began to grow narrower. It was probably women who invented agriculture, since gathering plants was traditionally a woman's job. But farming changed everybody's roles and created a new way of doing things all over the world, the village way. People have probably lived on this spot for about 8,000 years, and at the start it would have been what's called an autonomous village. There were no cities yet, no kings, no soldiers, just hundreds of independent villages, each living its own quiet life. And decisions probably still got made the old hunter-gatherer way. Everybody came together and talked things over until they reached a consensus. Hanya Sholkami is an anthropologist, and the villages she studies are in 20th century Egypt. But the economic realities in a village like this have not changed much in thousands of years.
In villages in particular, but I would dare say anywhere, the social fabric would completely collapse without the input of women in economics. Everything to do with the essential day-to-day life of villages must be processed through women. If men cultivate the wheat, it has to be picked over and put through a mill to become flour and then to be processed into bread, which is the lifeline of everyone. The main investment of any rural household, besides the land, is the cattle that they own. This is the women's domain. This also means that women are so central to the home that sometimes they hardly ever leave it. It's the fact that there is so much live capital
Unlike hunter-gatherers, villagers owned things. And to make sure this valuable property stayed in the family, almost all the earliest cultures passed it down through women. Babies have fathers too, and the villagers knew it. Once you've tamed animals, it's obvious that making babies requires a male input. But you can't really be sure which male is the father, while you always know who the mother is. So men's property went to their sisters' children when they died, not to their own. The status of men dropped steeply when human beings settled in villages. Once their value to society had come from their ability as hunters, but the wild game was quickly hunted out near the villages, and when hunting lost its importance, so did the people who used to do it. We don't actually know who sat at the head of the table in the autonomous villages, but we do know that in some places women were buried in the center of the house with the valuable household goods, and men were buried out at the corners with the children. Archaeologists find up to 100 female fertility figures for every male symbol. Fertility was the key to whether the villages lived or died, and fertility was traditionally female magic. Men were never actually oppressed. There was never a matriarchy in that sense. But you can see how men might have felt marginalized in the early village cultures. So what's that got to do with us? Well, first of all, the huge changes that happened when hunter-gatherers settled down in the autonomous villages show just how flexible this thing called human nature is. Male domination isn't natural, and neither is equality of the sexes. It all depends. Same goes for whether we're warlike or peaceful, democratic or authoritarian. Change the way we live, and you may also change the way we behave towards each other. Men were just not very important in the autonomous villages, and people who don't feel important tend to feel resentful instead. You realize, of course, that we're talking about the raw material for a revolution here. And the revolution duly happened, so long ago that it isn't in the history books. But thousands of years later, we can see the results of it all around us. Now women are at the bottom of the pecking order. Men run practically everything, and there's military all over the place. What happened? The Middle East is the best place to look for answers because over half the people on Earth live in cultures that stem from here.
There are various kinds of histories, and the one that got recorded is not the only one, but more importantly, it is the history of the dominant person. It's the dominant group. It is male history. It is the state's history. The archives that I see and the documents that I consult in the Egyptian National Archives down there on the Nile they are documents of state repression, whether they are police records, prison accounts, medical treatises. Now, for important purposes, these are all written by men. Women are excluded, and when they appear in a very marginal way.
Khalid Fahmy studies the history of militarism in Egypt. Today, he's celebrating his doctorate with friends, mostly young scholars who spend their working days trying to piece together other bits of the human puzzle. Huda Lutfi researches the lives